Erika Kirk was Charlie Kirk's handler, probably installed by Israel. I'm not sure, but probably it makes sense. All these Egyptian jets were following her around. I think it was 71 locations.
Erika Kirk has removed the wedding photo of her and Charlie Kirk from Charlie's office.
What is happening over there?
Before we get into anything, I need you to really lock in for a second, because what you're about to hear is the kind of story that sounds unbelievable at first. But the more you listen, the more it starts to connect in a way that's honestly hard to ignore. We're talking about Kanye West stepping into a situation that was already filled with questions, and then saying something that has completely changed how people are looking at Charlie Kirk and his relationship with Erika Kirk. Not just a small comment, but something that suggests there may have been a whole different reality behind closed doors. Because according to what's now being discussed, this wasn't just a normal relationship with ups and downs. The claim is that Charlie may have felt stuck, like he was in a situation he couldn't easily walk away from. And when you hear that, it hits different, because this isn't coming from a random voice online. This is coming from someone who actually knew him, someone who was around him before all of this, someone who could have been part of real conversations that never made it to the public. And here's where it gets even more intense, because what Kanye West is now saying doesn't exist in isolation. It lines up with things that other voices, like Candace Owens, have been hinting at for a while. And when multiple people start pointing in the same direction, even if nothing is confirmed, people start paying attention in a completely different way. Now add in the details that people have been revisiting, the timeline, the tension people think they see, the moments that didn't quite make sense at the time, and suddenly this doesn't feel like just another internet story anymore. It feels layered. It feels like there could be more going on beneath the surface than anyone realized when everything first happened. But let me be clear about something before we go any further. A lot of what's being discussed right now is based on claims, interpretations, and online conversations, not confirmed facts. And that's important. Because in situations like this, things can spread fast, narratives can form quickly, and it becomes harder to separate what's known from what's being assumed. Still, that hasn't stopped people from asking one major question over and over again. If Charlie really felt the way it's being described, then what was actually happening behind the scenes? And that's exactly what we're about to break down step by step. Because once you start connecting all the pieces, the past relationships, the resurfaced clips, the different versions of how things began, and now Kanye stepping into the conversation, this story takes a turn that nobody was expecting. Now, to really understand why what Kanye West said is hitting so differently right now, you have to go back and look at the connection he had with Charlie Kirk long before any of this current situation even existed. Because this isn't some random celebrity inserting himself into a trending topic. There was a time when Kanye, Charlie, and even Candace Owens were all moving in similar circles, appearing together, having conversations, and building a certain kind of public alliance that people still remember to this day. And that matters. Because when someone has that kind of history with you, the idea that private conversations might have happened behind the scenes doesn't feel far-fetched at all. It actually starts to feel possible, maybe even likely. And that's exactly why people are paying attention now in a way they didn't before. Because think about it. If Charlie was going through something privately, if there were things happening in his personal life that didn't match the image people saw publicly, who would he talk to? Not the internet, not the public. He would reach out to someone he already trusted, someone who knew him before everything got complicated. And that's where Kanye's name enters the picture in a completely different way. Now here's where things start to build even more, because for a long time, there were already quiet whispers floating around online about tension behind the scenes. Nothing confirmed, nothing concrete, but enough for people to start asking questions, small details that didn't fully line up, moments that felt slightly off. And at the time, most people ignored it. They brushed it off as overthinking or just internet noise. But now, those same whispers are being revisited with a completely different lens. Because when Kanye West steps in and says something that seems to align with those earlier suspicions, it doesn't just add noise, it adds weight. Suddenly, people aren't just speculating anymore, they're connecting dots. They're going back, rewatching interviews, reanalyzing timelines, and trying to piece together a bigger picture that may have been there all along, but just wasn't obvious at the time. And one of the biggest things fueling that curiosity is the idea that Charlie may have been deeply unhappy in private. Not just normal relationship stress, but something heavier. Something that, according to these discussions, may have reached a point where he was seriously thinking about making major life changes. We're talking about rumors of potential separation, decisions about his future, even questions about what steps he might have been preparing to take next. Now again, none of this is confirmed, but the reason it's spreading the way it is because it fits into a narrative that people feel is starting to make sense when all the pieces are placed together. And that brings us to the turning point of this entire story. Because once people started looking closer at the timeline, especially the final days before everything changed, that's when things stopped feeling like coincidence and started feeling like something much more complicated. Now, this is the part of the story where everything starts to feel a lot heavier. Because once people began looking closely at the timeline, especially the final days before everything happened, certain details stood out in a way that they didn't at first. And when you line those details up next to what Kanye West is now suggesting, it starts to create a picture that people can't stop talking about. According to what's been publicly shared, the night before Charlie Kirk left for what would end up being his final trip didn't exactly look like what most people would expect. Instead of a normal night, something about it felt off to a lot of observers. One of the biggest details people keep going back to is the fact that Charlie reportedly chose to sleep in a different room, specifically his child's room, instead of the main bedroom. Now, on the surface, that might not seem like a big deal. People do that sometimes. But in this situation, with everything else being discussed, it raised eyebrows, because the explanation given was that he just wanted a better night's sleep before an early morning. But a lot of people watching from the outside felt like that didn't fully add up. They started asking, why leave the main bedroom in the first place if everything was normal? And then the next morning, things get even more noticeable, because instead of what you would expect, a goodbye, a hug, some kind of emotional connection before leaving, what's being described feels distant, cold, almost like something had already happened between them. Reports say he briefly came back into the room, grabbed his chain and his wedding ring, which he had taken off the night before, and then left without much interaction. Now think about that for a second. Taking off the wedding ring the night before, sleeping in a separate room, then leaving without a proper goodbye. Individually, each of those things might not mean much, but together, they start to feel different. And that's exactly why people are looking at this moment so closely, because to many observers, that doesn't feel like a normal routine. It feels like the aftermath of tension, the kind of tension that builds up quietly and then shows itself in small actions like distance, silence, and emotional disconnect. And this is where Kanye West's comments hit even harder, because when he suggests that Charlie may have felt stuck or trapped, people immediately go back to these moments and start connecting them. They start asking, was this part of something bigger? Was this a sign of something already breaking down behind the scenes? At the same time, there are still people pushing back, saying these moments are being overanalyzed, that not every action has a deeper meaning, and that it's dangerous to build conclusions from limited information. And that's fair, because the truth is, we don't have the full picture. But that hasn't stopped the conversation from growing. Because once people started putting these pieces together, the separate rooms, the removed ring, the distant goodbye, it created a sense that there may have been more going on beneath the surface than anyone realized at the time. And just when people thought they had a rough understanding of the situation, another layer got added that made everything even more complicated. Now this is where the story takes a turn that really gets people thinking. Because once the timeline started raising questions, the internet didn't stop there. People went back, way back, and started looking at the past, especially how Erika Kirk had described her relationship with Charlie Kirk from the very beginning. And what they found didn't feel as straightforward as it originally seemed, because over time, multiple versions of how they met started circulating, and that's where things got complicated. In one version, it was described as a simple introduction through mutual connections, something natural, something organic. In another version, it sounded more like a chance meeting during a trip, almost like fate just brought them together. And then, in yet another telling, it was framed as something that started as a professional interaction, like a job interview, that somehow turned into a relationship. Now here's the thing, any one of those stories on its own might not raise any eyebrows. People meet in different ways, and sometimes stories get simplified over time. But when you have multiple versions that don't fully match up, that's when people start asking questions. Or because suddenly it's not just about how they met, it's about why the story seems to change depending on when it's told. And that alone became a major talking point. People began digging deeper, pulling up old clips, comparing statements, and trying to figure out which version, if any, was the most accurate. And as that happened, more details started getting added into the mix. Old photos resurfaced. Past connections were brought up. Moments that didn't seem important before were suddenly being looked at under a microscope. And all of this started feeding into a bigger narrative. That maybe the relationship wasn't as simple as it appeared on the surface. Now again, none of this proves anything. But in situations like this, perception becomes powerful. Because when people feel like they're seeing inconsistencies, even small ones, it creates doubt. And once that doubt is there, it spreads. At the same time, there's another side to this conversation that's just as important. There are people who believe this is exactly what happens when the internet goes too far. That normal variations in storytelling are being turned into something suspicious, that clips are being taken out of context, and that once a narrative starts, everything gets forced to fit into it, whether it actually belongs there or not. And honestly, that's a valid point too, because the truth is we're looking at this from the outside. We don't have full access to what really happened behind closed doors. We're seeing fragments, moments, pieces of a much bigger picture that we may never fully understand. But here's why this part of the story matters so much. Because when you combine these inconsistencies with everything we talked about before, the timeline, the final moments, and now what Kanye West is suggesting, it creates a situation where people feel like there's more to uncover. It doesn't feel complete. And when a story feels incomplete, people don't move on, they dig deeper. And right now, that's exactly what's happening. Now this is where everything reaches a whole different level. Because once Kanye West stepped in and started speaking on the situation, the conversation didn't just grow, it exploded. What was already a story filled with questions suddenly turned into something much bigger, because now people weren't just looking at timelines and inconsistencies, they were looking at possible meanings behind them. Because Kanye didn't just make a vague comment, he suggested something that completely shifted how people were interpreting everything. The idea that Charlie Kirk may have felt trapped in his relationship. And once that word entered the conversation, trapped, it changed the tone instantly. Now people weren't just asking if things were complicated, they were asking how complicated they really were. And here's why that matters so much. Because once you introduce that kind of claim, every detail we talked about earlier starts to look different. The separate room, the removed wedding ring, the distant goodbye, the multiple origin stories. Suddenly, instead of random moments, people start seeing a pattern. Whether that pattern is real or not, it becomes the lens through which everything is viewed. At the same time, but another layer got added when people realized this wasn't the first time concerns had been raised. Voices like Candace Owens had already been questioning parts of the situation, suggesting there might be more beneath the surface than what was publicly known. So when Kanye's comments seemed to align with that direction, it didn't feel isolated anymore. It felt connected. And that's when the theories really started spreading. Some people began speculating that there may have been deeper issues in the relationship that never made it to the public. Others took it even further, suggesting that certain aspects of Erika's role in Charlie's life might not have been as straightforward as they appeared. And then there were those who went all the way into extreme territory, building narratives that go far beyond anything confirmed. Now it's important to pause here and say this clearly. A lot of these theories are unverified. They are based on interpretation, speculation, and how people are connecting different pieces of information, not confirmed facts. But here's the reality. That hasn't slowed anything down. Because once a story reaches this level of attention, it starts feeding itself. Every new post, every reaction, every clip adds fuel. People pick sides, they debate, they argue, and the conversation just keeps getting bigger. And Kanye's involvement is a huge part of why. Because whether people agree with him or not, his connection to Charlie gives his words weight. He's not just another voice online. He's someone who is actually in those circles. Someone who could have had real conversations behind closed doors. And that possibility alone is enough to keep people locked in. So now we're at a point where this story isn't just about what happened. It's about what people believe might have happened. And that difference right there is what keeps everything moving. Because until there's clear, confirmed answers, if those answers ever come, this conversation isn't going anywhere. At this point, everything we've gone through, the timeline, the inconsistencies, the resurfaced clips, and now what Kanye West has brought into the conversation, has created a situation that feels way bigger than where it started. Because this is no longer just about a relationship. It's about a narrative that people are trying to understand in real time, piece by piece, without having the full picture. And that's what makes this so powerful and so complicated at the same time. On one side, you have people who believe that what's being discussed is simply the result of the internet connecting dots that may not actually belong together, that moments are being overanalyzed, stories are being stretched, and that not everything needs a deeper meaning. They see this as a situation where perception has taken over reality. But on the other side, you have people who feel like there are just too many things that don't fully add up, too many details that feel off, too many moments that, when placed together, create a pattern that's hard for them to ignore. And for them, this isn't just random speculation. It's something that they believe deserves more clarity. And right in the middle of all of that is the biggest question of all. If Charlie Kirk really felt the way it's being described, then what was actually happening behind the scenes? Was this just a normal relationship going through private struggles that got pulled into the spotlight? Or was there something deeper that never fully came out? That's the question that keeps this entire story alive. Because until there's a clear answer, people are going to keep watching, keep analyzing, keep trying to connect every single piece. So now I want to hear from you. After everything we just broke down, where do you stand? Do you think Kanye West is shedding light on something people weren't supposed to see? Or do you think this is another situation where the internet is taking things way too far? Do you believe the timeline actually means something? Or is it just coincidence? And most importantly, Ant, do you think there's still more to this story that hasn't come out yet? Drop your thoughts in the comments right now. Go all in. I want real opinions, not safe ones. If you made it this far, you already know this story isn't normal. So hit that like button, subscribe if you haven't already, and share this video with someone who needs to see it because trust me, this is one of those stories that's not going to disappear. It's only going to get bigger